Okay, so everyone, let's get started. So, hi everyone. Today, first of all, good morning. And I know some of you are in from different time zone. So, for those, good afternoon or good evening. First of all, I would like to thank every one of you for joining this session and Women Tech Network for giving me this opportunity to talk about hooks. So, today's topic, Intro to React Hooks. Now, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Vidhi Sharma. I'm currently lead instructor at Flatiron School, Houston campus. I saw one of the question in the chat. Yes, Flatiron is associated with WeWork. Currently, I'm teaching at the Yale University for Flatiron and Yale course together. It's a CS course that I'm teaching currently at the Yale. You can find me, there are my handles, like you can find me on LinkedIn, you can see my projects on GitHub, and as well as you can email me if afterwards if there are some question. And at the end, I have one more slide with all of my handles again. So no need to worry about right now. You will get enough time at the end to get my contact information. I would like to give a little bit background about myself. So I have a master's in computer science. And prior to becoming a teacher, I was an IoT developer and a Java developer. So jump into our presentation. This is one of my favorite quotes, like only compare yourself with your previous version. And this is my favorite quote. The reason is I'm an instructor. I deal every day with my students, and most of the time they are comparing themselves with the other students. And it can be in any environment, not necessarily just when you are a student. When you are working, anytime sometimes you just compare yourself with others. And I don't feel that's right. The only reason is your circumstances are different than theirs. And you both are working very differently. So always compare yourself with your previous version and see how much you can improve or how much you have already improved. One more thought that I would like to share from Sheryl Sandberg. She is Facebook COO and founder of leanin.org. And I really like this code, like the sentence or the quote from her is, the word female, when inserted in front of something, it's always with a note of surprise. Female COO, female pilot, female surgeon, as if the gender implies surprise. But one day, there wouldn't be female leaders. There will be just leaders. And this motivates me a lot, so just wanted to share that. This is the outline for today's presentation. This is what we're going to take a look at today. We'll start with React history. Again, this presentation is required that you have knowledge of React already. So if you don't have React's knowledge, you might not find certain points connecting, but it's fine. Later on, once you learn React, then it will help you. But this talk will more around once a person know React, then how they can move forward. So starting with why hooks, the main topic, why we want to know about hooks. What are the hooks? Class versus functional component, create and update states, lifecycle methods, router props, and some hooks frequently asked questions. Just wanted to let you all know, I am not paying attention right now to chat. So I'll take all the question at very end. So just make sure you save your question for the end. And if we are running out of time, feel free to connect me on either LinkedIn or send me an email, and I would be happy to answer all of your question there. But I would take question at the end. Okay, starting with React history, what is this React? So React.js is an open source JavaScript library that is used for building user interface, especially for single page application. And those components or those interface are created using reusable components. And React itself, it has multiple libraries, like a library for the web development, library for the mobile development as well. It was released in May 2013. You can find more details about React.js on their official website, which is reactjs.org. It was actually invented and maintained by Facebook and a community of individual developers and companies. Currently, there are so many companies which are using React in their tech stack, including Uber, Airbnb, and Facebook. Those are the companies that are currently using React. Now, let's jump into this hooks. So this word hooks, like first of all, whenever you learn something new, and as an instructor, that my first thing that I would target that my student would know is why they are learning something. So right now we're going to talk about hooks. So let's think through this, like what is the problem that this hooks is solving? Like, why do we know what is hooks? So first of all, what is the problem right now with only React, not with hooks, is when there are two kind of components in React. One is class component and one is functional component. Again, those two are components, but most of the time there is a lot of confusion around like when to use what component. Is like class component provides few of the advantages that functional component do not provide, but class component comes with few of disadvantages as well. And to solve this problem, hooks was introduced that you can hook all the functionality of class component into functional component. So that means you can only have functional component. There is no need to class components anymore. So now, that is the problem that hooks is solving. But still, what are hooks? So it was introduced in version 16.8.0, and at that point it was in alpha version, but now it's a stable version. So you can go ahead and start using this. So hooks are functions that let you hook in React state and lifecycle feature from functional component. And the meaning of this is that before this, React state and lifecycle features were only available in class component, not in functional component. But from now on, going forward, using hooks, you can do all the state and lifecycle methods in your functional component. This makes development very easy. There is no need to class components anymore. This will improve your performance, like performance for your app. Migrating code to use hooks is very easy. It's literally very easy. There is not too much things to do around that. No need of using class components anymore. And hooks are only used inside a functional component. So yeah, we can use hooks, but hooks is a purpose so that you don't need a class component. You just need a functional component. So make sure you use hooks only inside functional component, not in class component. So just that's a restriction to hooks. And obviously that's a purpose of hooks. So I would not consider it as a restriction. Now we are talking about this class component and functional component, and hooks was introduced so that we no longer need class component. But let's think through this. Like, what are some benefits that we are getting from using functional component that class component is not providing? And here are a few differences between them. So class component is actually a class that you need to extend from React component. React is a library and component is a class inside that library. While functional component is just a plain JavaScript function. That's it. It's nothing much, but it's just a plain JavaScript function. Now, in class, you have multiple lifecycle method and state. But while in functional components, it's very easy to read and test. And in class component, for doing the same thing, and I'll show you the example in next couple of slides, that for doing the same thing for class component, you need to write a lot of code, while for function component, it is very less code compared to class component. And we'll see one of the example. So I'm talking about like, you can now create state and updating state, displaying state using hooks, but let's talk about like what is a state. So state is an object where property values that belongs to that component are stored. So within a component, if you want to store something, you can store inside a state. And what is the main benefit or a purpose of this is, as soon as the state change, your components re-render. You don't need to worry about re-rendering component by yourself. Your component re-render by itself. Now, this is one of the example of class components. So I'm going to show you the same example in functional component in next couple of slides. But let's think through this. Like, these are the class component. This is how the class component looks. I'm going to talk about a few things here. First of all, you can see class counter extend react dot component. So it's extending from React component class. Now, if you want to create state, you need to create constructor, and inside constructor, you need to do this dot state to create a new state. Now, there are a couple of other ways that you can create state, not without using constructor, and that's completely fine too. But you need to do something before your render function to actually create your state. Then, to display, before I talk about like updating a state, I'm gonna talk about displaying a state. So when you wanna display a state within a class function, you need to do this dot state dot, and then followed by your state variable, or I would say state key. As state is an object that means a key and value pairs. And if you all see that when we were creating a state, we did count, which is 0. So count is our key and 0 is our value. So here we did this dot state dot count to display the current value. And now what I want to do is I have a button, which is the text on the button is going to be increment counter. Then when this button is clicked, I'm calling a function called increment counter. And that function is actually updating my state using a function called this dot set state. So this dot set state is a function that you need to use to update your state, and where you can say like a key and what is the new value for this key. And if you all can see here, when we are updating a state, we are saying this dot state dot count, that it means previous value of the count plus 1, because we want to increment this counter. So these are the 3 things that I would like to mention here in the class component: creating a state, updating a state, and displaying a state. Now, let's see the output. So if you all can see, as soon as the increment counter button clicks, and again, starting with 0, as soon as it's clicked, it's incrementing 1 by 1. Like counter 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. Now, that is about class component. Now we'll see exactly the same example, but using hooks. Now we want to use hooks in our application. Again, hooks is used for functional component. So first of all, I'll talk about those 3 things, starting with creating a state, followed by how to display that state, and followed by how to update that state. So for creating a state, there is a useState function which you need to import from React library, and which is available in all the React library version after 16.8.0. So you need to import that useState function. And what this function is going to do is, this is going to take an initial value for your state as an argument, and it will return an array back. So this function will create a state with an initial value, plus it will declaring a function for you, which you can use to change that state. So for example, we have a count, and in square brackets, we have clicks, and increment equals useState 0. So what I want to do is, there are initially clicks that I want to put, which is equal to 0. And the increment is a function that I will use to increment or to update my value of this click states that we just created. Now, this syntax that you all are seeing in the first image, that syntax is using array destructuring. So array destructuring is like when array is returning something and you want to store in the variable in order, you can use the syntax that is used in the first image. Again, useState returns an array with 2 elements. It takes 1 argument, the initial value of state, and it returns 2 things back in 1 array. Just return 1 array with 2 elements. And the first element is the state value, like whatever the value of the state. And the second element is the function to update that state. So if I write the same code, what you see in the first image, Without destructuring, it's going to look something like this. Use state 0, it's going to return an array, and from that array we want the element at index 0. Now array index starting with 0, so at index 0 we'll have the state value, and at index 1 we'll have a function to update that state. So this is how you can create state in functional component using hooks. Now let's talk about displaying and updating state using hooks. So displaying state, if you all see between h4 opening and h4 closing tag, I am displaying my state using just that name, just the state's variable name, which is clicks. I'm not using, like, if you all go and reference back to our class component, and I'll show you the comparison between two. But then if it's a class component, we need to do this dot state dot and then followed by the name of variable. But here you can just say clicks. That's it. And now when you want to increment this, so if you all see, we have a button which is increment counter, and I have given an event listener on this, which is on click. So on click of this button, we are calling increment, which was the function to update this state, and this function as an argument will take new value what you want to assign to your state. So basically the new value that we want to assign to our state is the previous click count plus 1. So that's what we are providing in on click event listener. So this is the final code of my functional component. If you all see, starting with line 1, we are actually importing use state from React. That we like, you need to import this so that you can use this function, and then we are creating the state. We are declaring a function that will increment this state, and then the same example, like you can display just using the variable name, and on click we have an event listener that is incrementing the previous click plus 1 to the new clicks value. So here I'm gonna go to my next slide, and this is the output, and there is not even a single difference in this output. You all can see, like, it's exactly the same how your class components output versus functional component output. So functionality remains exactly the same. Now I'm going to show you the comparison between the code, between the class component code versus functional component code. And on your screen, right side is the functional component and left side is the class component. And just by looking at this, first of all, I'm going back to the point that I have mentioned before, that in functional component, there is very less of the code. There is not too much of the code there. It's very less. Then few things. For like creating a state in class component, you need to like create constructor, this dot state, and then create your state. While in functional component, you just need to use, and again, when I say functional component, I'm saying functional component with hooks, because without hooks, functional component cannot declare states. So functional component with hooks using use state, you can actually create the state, assign some value to it, plus you can declare the function to update that state. So I'm going to give everyone a few seconds to take a look at this comparison before I move forward. Okay, so now let's move forward. Now what we were doing is so far is we just created one state and we were updating that one state and displaying one state. But let's think through this. What if we want to create multiple state? So here is a couple of examples. Now this is a hooks rule that if you want to create multiple state, depends on how many states you want to create, you need to use state function that many times. So click was one of my state. So I want to create a new state and a function that will change the state. So I need to use state. So that's my first line of the code. Then we are doing constant loading, and change loading is a function that's going to change this loading state, and use state, and as an initial value, I'm providing true, which is a Boolean value. And in third example, you can see we are creating an object in state. So again, I'm passing an object where name is the key and Vidhi is the value. So again, you can, in state, you can create how many states you want to create using useState function, and your state can be like your initial values can be anything, integer, string, Boolean, objects, anything is fine. Now, before I move forward, I just have a quick thing to clarify. And when I was learning these hooks, I was having that question that if you are a JavaScript person, you think like, why we are declaring this with constant? We are not declaring with let. So constant and let are used to declare variables. But here we use constant because constant scope is, yes, constant is something like it's going to be constant throughout the scope of that variable. And what happens in React is as soon as your state change, your component re-renders. And when your component re-renders, it's the new scope that you are getting. That's why here putting constant will not be a problem. Okay, so moving forward from using state now to lifecycle methods. Now, if you are not aware about, like, first of all, what is lifecycle method? So lifecycle methods are series of methods or events that runs from the beginning of the React component's birth to its death. And what is the meaning of that is when it's like unmounted from your DOM tree and DOM tree, React DOM tree. So here are a few lifecycle methods in class components. So I'm going to talk about class components lifecycle methods first. So starting with component did mount. So this method will call right after when the component is rendered. So far, like if you all know about the class component, you have constructor, then render, and after render, once render is done, or once the component is rendered, then component did mount method is going to call. This is where you run statements that require the component, it's already placed on the DOM. So that's required that your component is already placed on the DOM. Now, component did update. This method calls right after your component is updated. And the meaning of updated, there can be a couple of ways that your component is updated. One is your state is changed, your props are changed. So those times, this function is going to get called when any of these is going to call, or any of these events is going to happen, like either state is changed or props is changed. Now, component will unmount. So this method is called when the component is about to be removed from the DOM. So like you have some component on the DOM and you have some buttons that when you click on it, it just removes that component from the DOM tree. At that point, component will unmount, will be called before removing it, or it's when it's time. Now, I'm going to talk about one more hooks method. It's called useEffect. So it's another hooks method. And now the one more comparison that I would like to do at this point before we talk about the code is useEffect. The one method would be only enough to create any of the lifecycle methods, like component did mount, component did update, component will unmount. Only one method is used to create any of this method. Now, the question is, if only one hooks method can be used to work as the other lifecycle methods, how this method is going to differentiate what lifecycle methods we want? And the answer to this question is it depends on its second argument. What argument is passed as the second argument depends on that. It will work as one of the lifecycle methods. So starting with the first example, that useEffect, and as an argument, as the first argument, it's going to take a callback function. And this, when none of the second argument is passed, so then this function, use effect function or use effect hook function, will work every time where your component is mounted or updated or rendered. So anytime when your component is mounted, updated, or rendered. Now, when in the second argument, if you pass an empty array, so use effect in hooks function, it's as an argument, you're going to pass two things. First is a callback function, and second is an empty array. So when you pass an empty array, it's going to work as a component did mount. So that means when component is mounted. Then the third thing is when in the second argument in your array, you pass value of your current state, like state dot value, whatever your current state's value. If you pass those, this method will run every time when the particular state that you have mentioned in the second argument's array, whenever that state is changed, every time this function will run. And last is when component will unmount. So the lifecycle method is component will unmount, and you want to do the same thing with using hooks in your functional component. Use effect will again take two arguments. The first is a callback function, which returns an higher order function. And the meaning of higher order function is when a function returns another function, that means it's a higher order function. So when use effect takes as a first argument a callback function which returns an higher order function, and as a second argument an empty array, that will work as a component will unmount. So again, only one use effect will replace all of your lifecycle class methods. The only thing that is going to matter, like how use effect is going to run or how use effect is going to behave, is depends on this, what is the second argument is passed. If passed something or if nothing, then it's going to work just like when mounted, updated, or rendered. But if passed something, it depends on the second argument. What is the second argument that is passed there? Now, those are the basic hooks that you can use for your class versus functional component. And now I'm going to talk about something about React Router. So again, whoever doesn't have any idea about what is React or what is React Router. So React Router is used for the user side, or I would say for front-end routing. So when you go to any website and you see, like, for example, you go to www.facebook.com/ and your username. So what you see in that URL bar, that is a route. So you can create those routes using React Routers library. So again, they're in-class component. You can do it using different ways. But in functional component, now you can do React routing using hooks. And I'm going to talk about one of the React Router hooks function. It's called use history. So use history is a function that provides access to the history props in React Router. Now, if you all don't know what is history props in React Router, so history props in React Router, when you want to redirect to some other route, or when the meaning of other route, when you want to redirect to some other page, then use history function is used when you want to redirect to some other page. And it was used in class component, but going forward, you can use it in functional component. You can see this example here. We have a functional component, which is counter. And for that, you need to import user history, but from React Router DOM. Not only from React library, it's going to be from React Router DOM library. And then it's just like you create a constant using this function. And then whenever you want to redirect, so here I have a button, go to home button. And when I click on the button, I want to go to a route which is /home. So here, whenever I'm going to click on this button, history.push, and in parentheses, I'm saying encode /home, which will redirect me back to the home page. So to the home page route. So that's what user history function is going to do. Now there are some other hooks router props as well that you can use. One is use location. So again, all these props, make sure you import them in your functional component before you use them, and again from React Router DOM library. So user location provide access to the location prop in React Router. Use to access the query params to complete the routing string. And by the meaning of query params is, suppose you have a user / an ID. ID can be either 1, 2, 3, or whatever the ID is. So when you want to get those things from your URL that are passed as query params, you can use a hook called use location. There is another hook function that is called use params, so which provide access to search parameter in the URL. So again, if you hear this out, these two are kind of similar. Actually, you can use only use location and you don't need to worry about use params. But there are, I just wanted to mention that there are some use params function available in the hooks, or there is some use params function available in the hooks that you can use. And before hooks, if you want to do the same thing, you actually need to get the props from your route, and then you need to run match.params to just check what are the params in your URL. But now, using use params, you don't have to worry about that. So again, before I go to the hooks frequently asked question, I just would like to mention one thing, that practice, and when you practice, just make mistakes and you will learn the best at that point. So going to hooks frequently asked question, do I need to rewrite all of my class component? And the answer is no. There are no plans to remove classes from the React, so there is no need to worry about rewriting your class components to your functional component. You can have them. It's not going to harm your website or your web application. Which version of React include hooks? It's 16.8.0 or the higher version of React. Hooks use hooks or provide hooks. What can I do with hooks that I couldn't with classes? So now here comes a very interesting question, that right so far we have talked about like all the classes functionality that is provided to functional functionality with hooks. But now the question is, if like classes are providing that and I am fine with writing so many code or so many line of code, why would I like do hooks? So there is one more and very, I would say a key feature to hooks, that first of all, try to practice all this, and then you can go into a feature called custom hooks. So actually you can build your own hooks, like how use state or use effect or use location. Those are hooks that are inbuilt hooks function in React. You can actually create your own hooks. And you can find more details about this on React docs page. And again, it's the same website, reactjs.org. And feel free to send me email or just a LinkedIn message, and I would be happy to start this presentation with you all so you can follow the links there. And there are more frequently asked questions that can be found on React docs page as well. And you can find my code, the code that I have showed you during this presentation, on this particular link. Again, you can take a screenshot or you can take a picture right now, or just feel free to send me a LinkedIn message or an email, and I would be happy to share this presentation with you all. Okay, so before we move ahead and take some question, I'm going to say just one more quote. A person who never made a mistake never tried anything new. So just make mistake and learn from your mistake. Thank you, everyone. And again, those are my handles where you can contact me. And I would like to take some questions now. We do have few minutes, so we can take some questions. So everyone, feel free to drop in your question in chat, and I'll do my best to take those questions. So I have been using React for almost a year now and haven't jumped into hooks yet. So, okay, so somebody appreciated that. Thank you. There's one question in the chat. that is there a significant difference in building size if we only use hooks or functional component versus class component? So I would say yes, there would be a significant difference in your code when you are just using functional component versus class component. And I would say functional component are very easy to read, and you can test them very easily as well. You don't have to worry about doing too many things. And whenever you're working in a team, your partner or your teammate can understand your code very easily in functional component, and plus it's very less line of code. Okay. Again, feel free to drop in your question in the chat. I'm just taking a look at it. Okay. Okay, everyone, since there are no other questions, I would say again, take a screenshot or just take a, I don't know, picture from your phone. But I really appreciate you all. Thank you for joining, and thank you everyone for all of your lovely comments in the session chat feature. So I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining, and I'll see you all. Just connect with me, and I'll see you all later whenever you have a question. And feel free to join the networking if you want to discuss more just with the other people who joined this session as well. So thank you everyone, and have a good one.